Sam Bankman-Fried breaks his silence in an hour-long interview with the New York Times, but I've watched that interview for you, and I'm going to bring you the highlights, including this notion that he says I did not knowingly commingle customer funds. I'm still sick, my voice is going, but smash the likes, don't forget to subscribe. We're going to get straight into the charts because the reality is Bitcoin really doesn't care right now. Bitcoin's sitting here at 17,100 range. We're going to come on to that shortly, but first let's cover off, as promised, what Sam Bankman-Fried said. Now, it was an hour-long interview. I thought the questions weren't the best, but there were some okay questions in there from Sorkin, and we're going to cover off exactly what he says, but the big idea we're seeing here is that Sam Bankman-Fried wanted to come out, he didn't want to hide in a hole, he says, and he wants to play the look. I'm CEO, it was my responsibility, I did a bunch of things and I come across as incompetent, I didn't do anything meaningfully. I didn't mean to cause any fraud, I didn't mean to commit any fraud, and it was just me being bad at my job, right? And that's the typical fool's play where you act like you didn't know any better, and that way you cannot be liable for any legal implications from this. So that's the angle he's playing, and he came out, and we can read through here some of the quotes. Look, I screwed up, right? And he kept saying that. He said that plenty of times, and even the audience were chuckling at him as he was saying this when you watched the interview. I was as truthful as I'm knowledgeable to be. I thought this was a very interesting quote, and this was another underpinning of the interview. Anytime a question was asked, he'd always caveat it with the fact that I don't have access to data. Now, the reality is you are the CEO of this company. Now, whilst I understand that since the liquidator has taken control, which is at the point that you raise your hands, right? As a CEO, as a captain of the ship, you raise your hands to say, hey, we're going down here. We've hit the iceberg. We're sinking. Liquidators, can you come in? At that point, the liquidators will push you out. I understand. You're now former CEO and you don't have access to that data. Granted. But up until that point that you flew the white flag, you filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, you had all the data, you knew minute by minute what was going on. So just to keep using that vocabulary of saying I was as truthful as I'm knowledgeable to be. Stop claiming that you do not have access to data or you didn't know, right? But again, this is the tactics you play, right? Oh, I didn't know any better. I don't know. I don't. You play dumb. So that was an interesting thing that he says. I'm truthful as I'm knowledgeable. You're either truthful or you're not. Okay. He then said, there's a time and place for me to think about myself and my own future. And he also said that he thinks FTX users, the US branch, right, FTX US subsidiary, could be made fully whole. So he keeps saying that. He keeps saying, look, as far as I saw before I left, that they could be made fully whole. But then my question is, why did they file Chapter 11 bankruptcy as well? Right? Because if they were completely solvent, why would they go into bankruptcy as well if it's a separate subsidiary? So that would be my question back to you, as Sam Bankman-Fried. Why did they file under Chapter 11 as well if they were perfectly fine? Clearly, there's something up there as well. He was then asked about what happened with the $515 million that was suspiciously transferred, and he said, "Oh, look, some of it was moved by the liquidators. The Bahamian authorities in Bahamas came out and said they've moved some for safeguarding as well." But he also said that there was improper access of assets. He was also then asked, even though your lawyers have been telling you not to come out and do this interview, why did you do this interview, right? Why are you coming out and giving this interview when you could be facing civil legal action? And he said, I have a duty to talk and explain what happened. And he added that he didn't know of times that he had lied, but said he tried to make FTX seem exciting. I was as truthful as I'm knowledgeable to be. Right, this is what he said. This is what he's saying. And he also spoke about the fact that he was donating to both parties. And he also lamented the fact that, regulation was like that. He said he spent thousands of hours just trying to get meetings with regulators. And whilst I don't agree with what Sam Bankman-Fried has done or says, I think this is a really important point, which I do want to pull upon. And I want to urge anybody working within exchanges, whether you're the top dogs, whether you're CZ, whether you're Brian Armstrong over at Coinbase, whether you're any of the other guys, Ben from Bybit, all of you guys should be getting together and you should be voicing how difficult it is and where there is being shady tactics by global regulators to force your hand. So what I'm saying by this, just to make sure I'm completely transparent here, if you as companies are being forced to donate to certain causes or to do certain things and pull certain strings to get a meeting with a regulator, We need to know about this because this is not on. Because on the one hand, you've got these regulators who are playing hardball, trying to say, oh, you're not meeting all our requirements. But then on the other side, we're hearing these kinds of stories from SBF. So I'd love to hear more from the other exchanges and founders coming out and saying how difficult it is, or how difficult they found it to get regulatory clarity in the different jurisdictions around the globe. That would be very interesting to hear. So we'll continue here. He also says, I did not try to commit fraud. So he's almost saying, yeah, maybe I did end up committing fraud, but it wasn't my intention. And remember, this is more legal tonality. This definitely shows that he's rehearsed this, right? He's had some bit of training over the last couple of weeks before this interview, because the wording is not... It's not normal. And even if you watch the mannerisms in the interview, he is very jittery. And obviously he would have been nervous, and his persona is like that anyway, particularly live on such a big conference stage like that. But he was very jittery. His arm couldn't stop. He kept twitching. He needed some time to look around. It was a very difficult interview to watch, actually. And if you do have time, go watch the full interview. But he says, I did not try to commit fraud. And again, that comes back to this notion of intent. Remember, one thing is you committing fraud, but did you intend is what a court of law is going to want to look for in the Western world. He also said, so he says, let's find the next bit. It was clear from the interview SBF knew he could face civil and criminal liability. Exactly. All of his wording alludes to the fact that he knew what was going on. He just wanted to give a bit of an appearance, right? He says the classic advice is to don't say anything, recede into a hole. But he says he would have none of that. That's not who I am, and that's not who I want to be. Okay. He also said that he's in the Bahamas now, but he said there was no legal risk of him to return to the United States, which is interesting because I don't think that's completely transparent. If there was no issue for him to go to the States, he would go to the States and do this in person. But he was doing it via a video connection. So clearly there is more of an issue than he's leading to believe, and he's not completely sure that things are going to be okay. Now, look, I think this is the first of many appearances that Sam Bankman-Fried is going to do. Now that he's rehearsed his lines, he's going to go out and give the same set of repeated words in different outlets, no doubt. And the reality is, do we need to worry about this? I don't think so. I don't think we need to worry about it unless more bigger issues come to play. And I think the thing that can throw us off now is any further contagion. And that's what we really need to avoid. What we do not want to see is something else come out, another exchange, another lender facing problems as contagion from the FTX fallout, and ruin this little recovery. So we had our we had our November lows here after the FTX. We managed to consolidate. We got a nice breakout to the side. And what I want to see is continued movement to 17,600 and get above it. That challenge remains. That's what we need to do. Now, the positive news is, since yesterday, we covered off, go watch my video yesterday, Jerome Powell's remarks, because Jerome Powell came out nice and dovish yesterday. And we're seeing now that markets are opening up the 1st of December today in the US fairly decently green, right? So we're seeing a little bit of greenness here on the NASDAQ, and they're trying to rise here on the basis that we could be seeing 50 basis points at the next meeting. Remember, 75% of the market is now pricing in that 50 basis point U-turn. Now, there are a few things. There's a reason this is not being 100% priced in, because things can change. Right? Yes, Jerome Powell's alluded to the fact that he wants to slow down, that he'd rather slow down now than to over-tighten and plummet the economy into a recession, right? Let's not forget, a lot of people are overlooking the fact that we had the Q3 GDP revision, the second estimate yesterday, showing 2.9% growth, so they revised it up by another 0.2. So this is showing that the US economy is pretty healthy right now, okay? We had the ADP jobs figure, which came in lower yesterday, which is giving Jerome Powell ground to say, okay, maybe the 75 base point rate hikes are taking effect on the labor side, and maybe I just need to be careful that I don't plummet us into a recession by over-tightening. He'd rather slow down the rate hikes into 50 increments or 25 basis point increments and then just tighten for longer, or stay at that higher interest rate for longer throughout 2023. So there is some good news there, but there's some bad news as well, right? Because we don't know how long he's planning to stay at these new interest rates for, and also will the terminal rate, the final rate he gets to, be higher than the previous 4.7, 4.8 that the market was thinking? Will it get to 4.9? Will it get to 5? What kind of level is he going to tighten up to? That's now what the market is a little bit concerned about. Now, fear and greed index, you can see here sitting at 27. Okay, so we see just a notch down a little bit from yesterday at 29. We can also see that the dollar index is going to be another important one for us to look at, and that is falling really nicely for us here today, which is perfect. Okay, this is perfect what we're seeing in the dollar index. So if I show you exactly what's happened here, if you take a look at this, when we broke the EMA ribbon to the downside, we got some, well, dollar index unfortunately got some support from the 200 exponential moving average. That's this blue line here, and it bounced. But the good thing is it didn't get to the EMA ribbon. It got rejected again. Then we saw that rally again, just as we predicted. But it's good that we've managed to create a lower high and we've managed to jump in sooner and push it to the downside. So this is really good news on the dollar index front, that we seem to be in a nice, prolonged daily chart downtrend, which normally means a good movement for Bitcoin. But the problem here is we just need to quickly get over this FTX FUD. If we can stop these headlines about Sam Bankman-Fried, if we can move on, then we can just be correlated back to the equity markets and we can start to work our way up. But the problem is markets are still unsure about the unfold of what's happening here with FTX. We don't know what other exchanges are struggling. You had Kraken lay off 1,100 jobs the other day. Right? We don't know what's going on. People are still even worried about players like Binance, and rightly so. We cannot trust anything right now. And so that's naturally going to have a weighing on the crypto markets, which is why even though the dollar index is down 1% today, crypto markets are down 0.67 as well. Okay, so we're getting this decoupling. It's not as obvious as it used to be, where dollar index is, spending a day down and Bitcoin be flying that day, and vice versa. You're getting these mixed days where there's some weird decoupling going on. But overall, it's good that the dollar index is coming down. It shows that risk can start to turn on a little bit compared to where it was. We can also take a look at the US 10-year, because remember, the US 10-year shows you a level of how much risk appetite there is. The higher this is, the less risk appetite there is. And again, you can see you flipped your EMA ribbon to the downside. So we are getting less of a risk-off mindset. So risk is slowly starting to trickle back on. Now, what am I doing in this market? Well, I'm playing this really patiently, guys. As you guys know, I've had plenty of opportunity to accumulate. And I'm not going to be accumulating at these 17,000 levels. Definitely not on this up leg. I do not need to be accumulating. If we get rejected, and this is important, if we get rejected from 17,600, then you start to get some of these horrible levels back into play. But I don't want anybody to think we are just suddenly out of the woods now because of this. We are running into the EMA ribbon. We could easily get thrown back down and create even lower lows. So it's not like we're out of the woods from 15,000 or 14,000 or some of these levels which we've spoken about. But it is good that we're running into our EMA ribbon. Okay, we want to flip it and we want to bounce at 17,600. We want to do this. Okay, but this is going to be the critical moment. 17,600. Can we work our way above there? We've still got a few more macroeconomic elements which are going to play into either of these directions, playing out today and tomorrow. You've got your PCE inflation coming out later on today in the US, 1:30 Eastern time in the US. That is the inflation rate that the Fed looks at. So it's going to be important that we look at that. And we've also got the next CPI reading coming later on in the month as well. So we need to look at that because Jerome Powell is going to be using those. We've also got our ISM figure, less important, but still something that will be looked at, as well as one of the Fed officials, Bowman, speaking. But then tomorrow, we will be coming live with what happens. Tomorrow, we will have the non-farm payrolls, okay? And that is the official jobs figure that Jerome Powell will be using. Because the ADP figure showed that jobs market cooled down slightly. Will the non-farm payroll support that view and continue to show that labor market is softening, which will further give us confidence that Jerome Powell will follow through with what he was saying yesterday, which is that he needs to slow down his pace of rate hikes down to that 50 base points. And if we can get that pivot, that means we could possibly have a really strong positive December, hopefully, if we do not get any further contagion. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to smash the likes. Don't forget to subscribe. Check out this video here to find out exactly what Jerome Powell said yesterday and why the markets are pretty confident after his dovish remarks. And I'll see you in the next one.